presidential comebacks. That's what the first video is going to be about. Let's do it. Just a quick warning before you dive into this video. It's entirely just me nerding out about elections that happened upwards of 100 years ago and how this is like a statistical anomaly and historically a very interesting election to look at regardless of all the politics thrown aside. So yes, dive into it. You have been warned. I'm sorry if I start throwing heaps of names at you that you should never know, but it's undoubtedly going to happen. Anyway, enjoy. If you've been living under a rock, you may not have heard of a particularly big election that's coming up this year in the United States, and that is the election between former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden. Now, regardless of how controversial that's going to be, I want to address it from a historical perspective and see, is it a particularly interesting election? What former President Trump is trying to do in launching a comeback into the presidency is actually very interesting. It's not the first time it's happened, but it is the first time in a long time. So that's really what I want to look at in this video, basically. What are the trends with presidents who run again? What have these men done? Who were they? And really just looking at what can we draw from history and apply here, and really just answer the question of like, this feels like an important election, but is it really? So without further ado, here's the intro. I don't have money for an editor. That's the best you're going to get. Now, Trump's 2024 bid is actually the 8th time that a president has left office and then tried to come back in like some sort of like return campaign to take back the office of president. And how has it worked out in the previous 7 attempts? Not great. It's only worked once amongst the previous 7 times. But let's take a look at them all. Now, the first guy to attempt this was actually Martin Van Buren, and he tried to do it twice. In 1844, he failed to get the Democratic nomination again, and then in 1848, he tried to run with his own third party that was like broadly just anti-slavery, the Free Soil Party, and that didn't really go anywhere. So he kind of made a name for himself trying to come back and failing twice. We should really call it Martin Van Burening. Martin Van Burening. The next guy to try, I guarantee, even if you know about American history, you probably know nothing about this man, Millard Fillmore, one of the most irrelevant presidents the United States ever had. And yeah, he was basically a vice president who took over when Zachary Taylor died of gut poisoning, was on for a couple of years, then failed to get renominated by the Whigs, and a couple of years later was nominated by an anti-immigration party in a pretty powerful and successful third-party run, but really didn't come anywhere near close to winning again. Then came Ulysses S. Grant, who came out of retirement to try and win a third term, but even though he was ahead on a lot of the balloting, didn't really go anywhere in the end. And now the interesting one, the one that I'm sure Donald Trump thinks about a lot, that's Grover Cleveland. This man is the only man to ever come back and win a non-consecutive term. It's probably the only thing you know him for. He won an election, lost the next one, then came back and won, and he's the only person in history to do it. Side note, Grover Cleveland is actually part of a very, very niche group of Americans right here who have won the popular vote on 3 separate occasions in different elections. Screw that first guy, by the way. It's a very, very, very small group, and I've included Nixon here because technically, in a subject that really requires its own video, he might have won the presidential popular vote in 1960 against Kennedy. But anyway, these are the only people to ever win in 3 or more FDR popular votes. It's crazy, that stat. Back to the main topic. The next person who did this was Theodore Roosevelt, who you probably know. He's on Mount Rushmore. He was known as kind of like a really masculine guy, big mustache, hunted big game and such. He came back in 1912 to try and contest the Republican nomination, lost, but then formed his own Progressive Bull Moose Party and came a respectable second to Woodrow Wilson and the Democrats, who we hate, by the way. Terrible man, Woodrow Wilson. No respect for him. And then the last time that a president tried to come back was Herbert Hoover, who tried to run for the Republican nomination in 1940, but really went nowhere. FDR kept winning in landslides, so this one's also just kind of irrelevant, honestly. And then that was kind of it. The last time that a former president really tried to come back in a meaningful way was 84 years ago in 1940. So this election is, I mean, it's nothing new, but it's something we haven't seen for a while. But bringing it back to 2024, this is why my nerd president stats brain is so obsessed with this, because it is the first election in 112 years Since Teddy's rerun, where he fought against both Wilson and the Republican President Taft, where two presidents have gone head to head in a presidential election. It has been 112 years, not since 1912, have we seen two presidents go head to head in an election. I don't even know if any Americans are left alive from that first run, let alone anyone who would even come close to remembering it. It truly is a monumental moment in history from this very specific perspective that I have. To take it even further, you have to go back 128 years to see a rematch between two presidents and bring up Grover Cleveland again, as we all love doing on a day-to-day basis. It was in 1892, the last time that two candidates faced off, and then those two candidates faced off again, and both of them had been president. The last time we even had a rematch between candidates was when the Democrats kept nominating the same guy to run against Eisenhower in the 50s. So however you look at this, it's quite monumentally important. And I know a lot of people, quite reasonably, hated the idea of a Trump and a Biden rematch for very reasonable and very understandable political reasons. But the sheer historical niche that this hits in terms of being a once in a 128-year event just is mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing. But yeah, that was really what I wanted to ramble about in this format, as opposed to the vertical version that you normally see on TikTok or Instagram. But yeah, I just really wanted to stress that this election, even if you aren't invested in the party politics of it at all, is monumental. It's a very rare instance in which Americans accept both candidates of an election pitching why they should get another chance, and both of them being successful in that. I'm sure there are plenty of interpretations you can come up with that are much smarter than what I have, which is really just like a face level, just historical evaluation of what's going on. So the geriatric Royal Rumble rematch aside between these two, who have a combined age of 160, which was how long ago the Civil War was, I hope that I've given some positive spin or reason to, if not enjoy, appreciate how odd it is.